I'm Joe here with my co-host.
Hello and greetings.
And today I'm going to be discussing the Ainulindalë in a moment. I just need to share this on Twitter again because why not? And anyone who views this can feel free to do the same. Why not? And let me see. Let's see, we'll just stick a bunch of hashtags on that after it finishes loading. Done. All right. So as you guys can see, we're going to be reading the opening parts of the Silmarillion. This is a part of the book that apparently has got scholarly approval from a lot of people, as well as approval from, for example, the Catholic Church, for all that that's worth. And yes, I don't exactly have the most warm-hearted feelings towards the church. Like, I don't hate it, but on the other hand, even today, it's kind of prone to problems. That said, the opening paragraph, there was Eru, the one who in Arda is called Iluvatar. Right there, time to unpack. Eru means, I believe, the one in Quenya. Iluvatar means all father. So we have here a Nordic reference. Now, apparently, I read up that earlier editions of the Ainulindalë had more references to Norse mythology, but Tolkien gradually removed them. Now, I've got some of the rough drafts, but I can't remember if the History of Middle-earth has any slightly more Norse ones. That said, the frame narrative was originally set with an Anglo-Saxon Elfwine, but that was removed by Christopher, who felt, no, doesn't work, which it doesn't. But here you've got one of the last few references to Norse mythology with Allfather. That is to say, Othin, or Odin, who one of his titles is Allfather of the gods and of creation, because he's said to have created everything. And Tolkien, though, is leaning more towards a Catholic sense of God, whom in the Catholic religion is Allfather. So there's a lot of crossover between Christianity and Norse mythology to an extent. A certain goddess of Niflheim is noteworthy for being the inspiration to an extent for a certain world that's Christian. We're not allowed to say it because, YouTube, H-E double hockey stick would be the Christian term, but it's actually H-E-L because a single hockey stick, because the thing is the Norse dealt with two L's, the name, I mean. At least in terms of English linguistics, the name is, for certain realms, derived from a certain demoness from, or giantess from Norse mythology. It might, like in no other language is the underworld of the Christian religion referred to by the Norse for a Norse goddess, who's the goddess of the underworld. So it's a very peculiar thing that's peculiar to English to an extent, and I think maybe a few other Scandinavian languages. But for example, in French, we're not allowed to say it again because YouTube, but the underworld has nothing to do with that. Yet the French term translates as in irons. if you were to actually look at it from an etymological point of view, in irons, you're basically in chains in the underworld.
It is pretty much seen as an eternal prison.
Yeah. Here, though, we have that he made first the Ainur, the holy ones. Now, holy ones, some Christians believe in angels and whatnot. Or you can take it as a reference to the 12 Olympians and so on. But really, there's a bit of a pecking order of sorts of 12 Olympians and lesser gods, with the Valar and Maiar to an extent. Or I should say, not lesser, but so much as you have the 12 main ones, and then you have the others. Because even in Greek mythology, there are some outside of the 12 main deities who can rival the main ones. They just don't really have as much of a role in the politics on Olympus. In turn, Melian, for example, could rival some of the Valar. She just chooses not to. She is not the lesser of any Valar. But in terms of pecking order, I guess you could say politically, I guess you could say she might rank lower. And that were the offspring of his fought. Here he fought them up and they came into creation. What was it? I think it was, there was a Norse myth where, not Norse myth, Egyptian myth where Thoth was said to have creation from his thoughts. So, or at least an egg from his very mind. And from the egg hatched Amun-Re. I think that was one variant. So this is a nod to Egyptian mythology, as well as, yes, Christian mythology, but Christianity derived a lot of influence from Egyptian mythology, just as it did also from Norse, just as it in turn had a certain influence over these other religions to an extent later on. Like, well, maybe not Egyptian, but like with the Norse, there was some exchange of sorts. For example, I suspect that the Christian understanding of like a final battle is somewhat more derived from the Norse view of Ragnarok.
That is actually a pretty apt comparison, because there's a reason why many compare the apocalypse to Ragnarok.
Yeah. That said, and they were with him before aught else was made. Yeah. The idea here is a nod to, yes, agree, the Christian myth of let there be light, and thus it was, or the thing with Thoth creating from his mind and thoughts. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad. Yeah. But for a long while, they sang only each alone. So they're kind of segregated from each other and put in their own corners, so to speak, each given his own role and possibly his own personality here. And the thing is, and in the understanding of their brethren, they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came to deeper understanding, increased in unison and harmony. They seem to have, at the beginning, all been on the same side. This has influences from various mythologies as well. Like, this is a theme that Campbell would have probably said is fairly universal and comparative across many mythologies and religions and human thought. The notion being that in the beginning, most positive forces or gods or God or angels or whatever were all on the same side. You look at Norse mythology, for example, Odin Vili Ve or Odin Hoenir, and we're all on the same side. There was harmony between the gods, and they defeated Ymir, as he's known to the demons, or Jotun, or Gelmir. They defeated him together and made from his body the world. They came across the Vanir, and there was a war. So, the harmony was broken. You look at Greek mythology, there's harmony, until Arano started becoming the sort of guy who beats on his wife, Gaia. So the notion that there was harmony at the beginning seems to be a fairly universal theme. And you also have Amaterasu, who her parents, Izanagi and Izanami, who were in harmony until one of them perished, ended up in the underworld, then the other, visit, only for Izanagi to discover his wife was rotting, and from her, and she was angered, Burston, and vowed to destroy 1,000 souls to create 1,500 every day. So the harmony was broken when their marriage fell apart. Here, Tolkien back to something fairly universal, but on the other hand, when it comes to music, he's hearkening to Celtic mythology with the Aran Mor, the singing into creation of the world, and specifically the Emerald Isle.
I was just thinking that a lot of Celtic culture revolves around singing and dancing.
Yeah, music in particular. There's a reason Christianity, though Christian, puts a lot more emphasis on singing than any other derivative of Christianity, and puts so much emphasis on Gaelic singing, because you don't sing in Latin, you sing in Gaelic. And the Gaelic songs, like I've heard a few of them, they're pretty beautiful. Although I would like to visit Scotland one day to listen to them in person, but you just listen to a few of them on YouTube and you'll see how beautiful they are. And it came to pass that Iluvatar called together all the Ainur and declared to them, okay, I gotta stop sharing because I gotta pick up a new page. And we have someone who's listening. Yay. A mighty theme. Okay. Here, I'll just share this second page because kind of important. There we go. Let me zoom in on that. All right. A mighty theme, unfolding to them things greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed, and the glory of its beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur, so that they bowed before Iluvatar and were silent. Here, once again, we have the unison and no hint of Melkor yet. Yet, he has to be active, and because he's the greatest. I guess you could say that much as Iluvatar is the maestro, or the conductor conducting the great orchestra, Melkor, I think, was supposed to be the concert master. That is to say, the chief violinist who transmits the silent commands of the conductor to the rest of the orchestra. But the trouble is, the role falls upon Manwë rather than Melkor, as Melkor decides to sow chaos. And which is something that's pretty horrifying for any musician that's conducting an orchestra. For an example of it, watch No Dame Cantabile to see how upsetting it is for Chiaki, the main character, who's a conductor, because to him it's horrifying when anyone decides to meddle with his concerts, and he often flies into a rage over it because, well, he's trying to weave together beauty itself, and not everyone takes it as seriously as him. Then Iluvatar said to them, "Of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with the flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices, if ye will. But I will sit and hearken and be glad that through you great beauty has been wakened into song." Now, the first thing to take notice is the reference to the flame imperishable. In Christianity, this is, the Holy Spirit or whatever, which is God himself. or at least a creative urge. In Norse mythology, there's the creative act after the gods dismember Ymir. In
Greek mythology, there's Prometheus that brings down
fire. Yeah, and you have Amaterasu, who she herself in Japanese mythology is the creative fire of the world. Without her, there is no warmth, there is no light, there is no creation. Because as much as Izanagi is a god of creation, Amaterasu almost embodies the role far more. She is the female force of creation in the world. And so the flame imperishable is Iluvatar, just as in Japanese mythology it's Amaterasu, just as I'd argue to an extent in Norse mythology it's Odin, whose one eye is often compared to a flaming eye. Like when he looks, there's a fire in his eye. And I read in a few stories, like in a few versions of stories, when men look at him, they're just spin, and others are inspired because it's the force of inspiration of creation of man. It's also something that Tolkien has Melkor desiring in the beginning, and yet it is Iluvatar, and Iluvatar is the flame imperishable. Like he is the flame imperishable, and it is him. It's symbiotic. And I guess you could say in Egyptian mythology, Amun-Re would be the imperishable flame or the secret fire. And the interesting thing about Egyptian mythology is Set would be the guardian of it and of Amun-Re, with Isis being kind of like, it's funny because in the original Egyptian myths, Set's the heroic force and Isis is the demonic one to an extent, wishing for the knowledge and power of Amun-Re and wishing to usurp him. And so, you've got this weird change that happens over the millennia so that she becomes the heroic character and Set becomes the villain, when in the beginning it was the other way around. But that has to do with history, with the Hyksos people taking up Set as their chief deity and this upsetting the Egyptians so that they assumed he was evil because he favored the Hyksos, Semitic people. But we're not going to make this purely a history lesson. We're just going to analyze the literature here. And let's see. Ye shall show your powers in adorning this fiend, each with his own thoughts and devices, if he will. So right there, we've got almost a reference to painting or weaving, as though they're, physically, they're creating a visual piece of art. And be glad that for you, great beauty has been wakened into song. So we have a very Celtic theme here that, of music being the creative force interlinked with the flame imperishable. Once again, this feels very Celtic. One second, I'll just change images. And here we are. Then the voices of the Ainur are like unto harps and lutes and pipes and trumpets and viols and organs, and like unto countless choirs singing with words began to fashion the theme of Iluvatar to a great music. And a sound arose of endless interchanging melodies woven in harmony. And it is here that they are really creating. And the echo of the music went out into the void, and it was not void. Right there. This is when they create art. So this sort of, it's barren, but like the seed is there to an extent. They're singing the world into creation in a way, but they don't realize it yet. They're so entranced by their music, which this is something that happens when you're creating something oftentimes, But it's interesting because Tolkien has Eru-Ilúvatar as the supreme creator, and every other act of creation is an act of subcreation. In the case of the Ainur, they are subcreating Arda. And this is where they never since have the Ainur made any music like to this music. So they've never done this before. They were each briefed individually on their parts and their roles. And though it has been said that a greater shall be made before Ilúvatar by the choirs of the... One second, because I had to screenshot it all. Entire pages of this. What the? Okay, I'm having minor technical problems. Sorry about that. Here we are. Ainur and the children of Ilúvatar after the end of days. Now, here, apparently Christopher removed the dagger Daggerath from the Silmarillion. This is a publicly known secret that he had it removed because he didn't think it fit. And I disagree with him very strongly. Dagger Daggerath is key to Middle-earth. And I do consider it canon. Canon is not something I like to discuss. I guess I'm kind of like Red Book in that regard. To me, the entire discussion of what's canon and what isn't seems a little moot and ridiculous. This is mythology. The Silmarillion, though, should be considered complete to a large extent. It's complete with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and whatnot. Like, I don't think, as I've said before, you can just pull a rough draft and say, aha, here it is, this is canon. Unless, if it removes from the Silmarillion. If it's adding extra context, it's canon. Like, Agnor and I think the dialogue of Agnor and Andreth, that should be canon because that's adding, it's not removing lore. And it's an entire Socratic discussion between Finrod, Felagund, and Andreth over, the nature of man and elves. And it allows us a better insight into the world itself of the Legendarium. And I mean, if Howard could have characters enter into Socratic discussions, like in the stories of Kull or even a few stories of Conan, why can't Tolkien? So, then the themes of Ilúvatar shall be played aright and take being in the moment of their utterance. For all shall then understand fully his intent in their part, and each shall know the comprehension of each, and Ilúvatar shall give to their thoughts the secret fire, being well pleased. So this suggests that the creative force here is not... He's kind of lending them the creative spark in order to materialize into creation something. In this moment, they are creating just as he created them. So it suggests that it's their thoughts and their music weaving it together. And he's lending them the fire. And it's almost like he's lending them creation, like the power of creation, but it's almost like he's doing it while they're singing, and it's not till the fire is withdrawn that they realize what has been done, or at least that might be one interpretation. I think that the idea is they don't realize they've created until he shows them Arda for beyond that lies pretty much beyond Ea, that is to say the universe as it is right now. The halls of Ilúvatar. It's beyond the halls, they're looking out. So it's not till they stop singing that he shows them, I lent you creation, creative fire.
Something deep within each of you
wove this into being. Yeah. Oh, and we have Mark Scheiber. Fingon is father of Gil-galad is part of my personal headcanon. Yeah, I prefer Orodreth. we've gone over it a bunch of times, but you know what? Fingon, sure. Like, my attitude is that's a minor detail, and that the important thing is that if someone says no, it's not Fingon or draft because Rough Draft 1 million says this, no, you've pretty much got one of two options, and I don't think I'd like it if it was not the option of Fingon or draft. Weirdly enough, I know. And hello, Mark. Hope you're well. Let me just open up the next piece of text. Oh boy, this image is a little larger. Okay, let's do this. It always takes me a minute because of the way Restream.io is set up. The funny thing is, though, you have World of Conan who could just shift like that. He has no problems. He'll just shift it with just a click of the buttons, and I'm left just amazed. Him and Indie Geek can just instantly shift things into focus with StreamYard. I don't know how they do that. Maybe it comes with experience or something, and we're not yet that experienced. But anyways, Iluvatar sat and hearkened. The term hearkened means to call someone to, or something hither, or to listen. Like, I really love this term. It's an older English term, and I'm pretty sure it's Anglo-Saxon at its root. And Tolkien was trying to harken back to more Anglo-Saxon terms rather than terms that had come from French and that had slipped into the lexicon after the conquest of 1066, which is an interesting idea. Funny enough, generally, I think I try to do that when I'm speaking French, because like when I hear someone say in French, weekend, you go, what? That's an English term. C'est fin de semaine, which means end of the week. But I think to Tolkien, he liked the original Anglo-Saxon terms, whereas many of us who are French prefer traditionally French terms rather than anglicized French, which is a little peculiar to the ear. And for a great while, it seemed good to him. For in the music, there were no flaws. Aha! He spoke too soon.
At the time, it may have been perfect.
But I like how Tolkien then has a aha, because, it seems good. This scene, weirdly, now that I think about it, reminds me of The Sorcerer's Apprentice with Mickey. The music and the magic seems perfect. So the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mickey, starts to doze off while the brooms are working. And before you know it, chaos enters into the theme of the song, and he loses control of the magic. And that's kind of what happens here. Although I don't think Iluvatar is dozing on the job, which would be pretty funny if he did. But the funny thing is the idea of a god sleeping on duty. I think there are some stories with that sort of thing, such as Thor, when he goes on an adventure with Loki and a few others. The two end up sleeping on the job and they get ambushed a few times. You have, well, actually, Loki gets into trouble while his companions often sleep in a few adventures. Not always his fault. Sometimes trouble finds him, but generally he's nasty and he goes looking for trouble. Interestingly, I think there's a variant of Amun-Re with the myth of Amun-Re where he ends up appalled by humanity, he changes Bastet, his daughter, into Sekhmet so that she becomes more bloodthirsty, and sicks her on humanity, then falls asleep, and humanity, naturally starts to plead, and then he awakens and hearkens to the cry of man and realizes what he's done, and proceeds to advise them to get Sekhmet drunk, at which point she's inebriated and just falls flat on her face and falls asleep. And, and Bastet and Sekhmet are separated from each other, and you pretty much have, and yet they're aspects of each other. So, yeah, the idea of someone dozing on the job is pretty mythological. it's also something that happens in Greek mythology a lot. Before Ranos, then Kronos, both ending up sleeping on the job, and both times their sons ambush them, be it Kronos or Zeus coming up upon his dad and slicing him open to pull out his siblings. But as the theme progressed, it came into the heart of Melkor to interweave matters of his own imagining that were not in accord with the theme of Ilúvatar, for he sought therein to increase the power and glory of the part assigned to himself. So it seems like he had a big role to play, and Ilúvatar assigned him a role, but Melkor decided, I feel I can hold out for more. Oh, you know what? I want more. I want more. And this is the first hint of greed in the history of Middle Earth. This is the first time someone feels greedy for themselves. I might argue Ilúvatar, to an extent, was demonstrating greed himself. He wanted to multiply his creations, but his greed was not for himself, but for beauty itself. Whereas with Melkor, it was a matter that he wanted more for himself. And you have here themes of course, Lucifer from, I think, Paradise Lost. And, of course, I would argue Norse mythology, but that's where a lot of my research was bent towards. As Loki originally, like you had Odin who had certain plans. Loki often went around them and often wove chaos and discord wherever he went, all for his own power and glory. But here, Tolkien's wrestling with a great deal of themes here. I'm just going to quickly go over some of the comments. I had to mention it, referring to Fingon and Gilgalad. And yes, I know. Here. Relevant to the topic, do you think this is also the moment of Tom Bombadil's creation, adhering to the theory that he is a remnant of the music of the Ainur? Well, I think the idea of the music of the Ainur, like everything in creation was woven into place with the music. And I think this would suggest that we are all the music of the Ainur in a way. But in that it exists within each of us because, as Joseph Campbell would have said, there's a touch of the divine in every individual. And this is what makes people so special and what separates us from most other creatures and whatnot. There's a touch of the divine in us. Hence, the Christian idea of God made us in his image. And even the Norse and I think the Egyptian myths suggest much the same theme idea. However, as to Tom Bombadil, if he's a trace of the first themes of the Ainur, it would certainly make sense. I wonder, though, if he's... I've heard it said that it was the chaos of Melkor that brought him into creation, because, Tom Bombadil's is essentially the one satyr god. I forgot his name very briefly. Pan. He's essentially the archetype Pan, but he's not wicked like Melkor. So that would dispel that idea. It's probably in the first bit before the discord of Melkor. Yeah, probably there that Tom Bombadil was woven in to the theme, but I don't think he was given physical manifestation. He was physically manifested into place quite yet. That would come much later. And I think that he was able to physically manifest once Arda was manifested. But he does seem to be one of the older forms of creation and does seem to play a pretty large role to an extent in Lord of the Rings, at least in showing that there's something beyond our comprehension. This is an idea that, there's something beyond everyone's understanding and whatnot. This sort of idea, weirdly, we occasionally get in while we're probably going to get into at some point in Power Rangers on our corner over there, because you have the morphing grid, which is composed of the negative energy of Zed and the positive energy of Zordon. And then you suddenly have Ivan Ooze, who's this demonic force who seems to predate the morphing grid and be beyond it. So there, it's the divine and the demonic force, Zed and Zordon. But then you have something beyond it that completely, is completely outside the realm of possibility. Well, with Ivan Ooze, there are hints of an elder god thing, like from Lovecraft. But here, I think the idea that Tom Bombadil was probably part of the original plan to an extent by Iluvatar. Now, there is the rumor that he is Iluvatar made into like Iluvatar's incarnated himself. I don't think that's it. I used to, but in hindsight, no, can't be. Because, for one thing, Gandalf does not mention that. And for another thing, I think Tolkien firmly rejected that idea. So I'd argue if anything, he must be of a, like he's something else. He's hard placed, but he's definitely Pan. Yeah, he's not wicked like Melkor. No one's wicked like Melkor. And in terms of fantasy fiction, Melkor ranks up there in the top 5 most wicked and cruel individuals around ever.
Can't deny that.
Yeah, they're Jadis is nowhere near as bad as him, as cruel as him. Nor is in Dragonlance, Takesis gets pretty close. She just keeps pushing for more evil and escalation until the gods just say, we can't handle this anymore. That's it. We're changing essentially the music of the Ainur, the theme, just to wipe you out because we've had it with you. But on the other hand, you also have Lady Windy from Suikoden, she's pretty evil. Cruelly, she torments the main character. So that his life is just, several of the main characters their lives are just intolerable, like Turin Turambar. It's on a caliber like that. But Melkor here is trying to advance himself. Here it almost seems like he's trying to usurp Iluvatar. And that's something that I find really, really cool. You almost have him trying to take up the role of Iluvatar in the song for himself. To Melkor, among the Ainur, had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge. And he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. So obviously he was favorite. He had gone off often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable flame. Here, it doesn't seem like everybody was informed, of that key detail. The imperishable flame is Iluvatar. Ulmo and Manwë seem to know, and yet not Melkor. But weirdly, I know Tolkien ended up, I think, laying down the criticism against Melkor that he was often too impulsive to properly plan things all too well. But I think he did have the patience to plan. He's a sadist. He just, once he gets carried away, he just has to go along with it. And he can't calm himself down. For the desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own. And it seemed to him that Iluvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Now, for one thing, he goes off into the void, and I actually know about 3-4 people who keep emailing me on Facebook oh yeah, this is when Cthulhu showed up, or the Elder Gods, and it's lay off with the Cthulhu stuff. I'm not a Lovecraft fan. I don't like that stuff.
Oh boy.
Mostly because as a kid, I ended up seeing the DC animated universe, and they brought in Cthulhu out of nowhere, and I'm never gonna like that.
Yes, it's one thing to bring in primordial beings, but
Yeah,
beings like Cthulhu and
doesn't make any sense. That said, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Now here, it seems like Melkor's kind of thinking a few steps ahead of Iluvatar to an extent, or at least maybe not Iluvatar, but the other Ainur at least. Like he's like, "Come on, isn't this all about creation?" It seems like as the flame imperishable is being mixed with, to spice up the music of everyone, Melkor seems to be the only one who's caught on and is going, "Oh, that's what's going on. Well, I want it." And you've got Iluvatar, "Wait your turn." No, I want it. It's mine. Essentially, "Give me, it's mine," as I think George Carlin once joked. But the void plays like it seems like Melkor was the only one who went off into the void to explore and came back. But whatever he did out there damaged him and transformed him. So it doesn't seem like it was part of Iluvatar's plan for him to go out there. And this is where it, like, the notion of there being a great emptiness before creation, there are mythological precedents. You look at Ginnungagap in Norse mythology. You have, of course, the Christian myth. You have Izanagi and Izanami, who are brought into creation by older deities, and then they help to shape the world, and then they stick a spear into the ocean, and there are perfect drops that fall from it, from the spear, and form the islands of Japan, which are supposed to be perfect. And of course, you've got the void before the Egyptian gods. So, but being alone, he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. Yeah, so when he was in the void, he began to come up with ideas that none of the others ever thought of. And this suggests that, okay, this might be weird, but he's the first to have discovered individuality. But his individualism was not a positive force, so to speak. And it seems like, in a way, Melkor is assuming the role here of Ymir, as in Norse mythology, Ymir starts the War of the Gods that creates the world when he slays Odin Villian-Ve's grandfather, who was created by Adumla, Athumla, I think it is, the cow that he suckled on, who was there at the dawn of time. And the cow ended up licking ice into the shape of a man, and Ymir then slays him out of jealousy. And Ymir was the first to discover individuality, and it was not a positive force for him. So it's interesting that Tolkien kind of harkens back to these ideas. But it seems like Melkor was the most observant of the Valar. While they're losing themselves in the music, he didn't. He refrained from doing so. Even as he's saying, he kept a part of himself. It seems like he kept a bit to himself in comparison to them.
I'm wondering about one thing. If with harmony and Melkor bringing in some chaos in there, was it inevitable that an aspect of that chaos would bring him more to evil?
I think kind of, yeah, to an extent. Because, like, the intent matters. He went in with evil intent, and the intent began to shape his vision, shape his personality, and reshape him in a way. So, like, not even Melkor was evil at the beginning, according to Tolkien. No one was wicked at the start. But the intent kind of seemed to have overtaken him. So that I remember hearing and reading, both in the Peaceful Warrior movie and in the book. That's a philosophy book. We are not our thoughts. And Melkor, thought was father to the deed, but there's also, like in Batman Begins, the philosophical statement of you are what you choose to be. Your actions defines you to a large extent. And there's a lot philosophic. There's like all across millennia, there's been arguments about what shapes a man or a woman, like in terms of their intent and their goodness or evil. And the thing here is Melkor's intent here was wicked because he wanted it for himself, but we are not our thoughts. But on the other hand, he let his thoughts kind of start to lead his actions into a certain direction, and his jealousy overtake him, and his greed and selfishness. So that I think he did become his thoughts in a way, the ugliest form of his thoughts. But there's an entire segment to the Ainulindalë, which gets really, really cool later when the Valar start to take when they enter Arda and they start to take physical shape. There's something really cool that Tolkien does. And we've got World of Conan, a channel we often team up with for a lot of Conan content. Hails to the great brothers. What is up? Nothing much. It's a bit of a lazy day, and we figured that today was a good day for analyzing the Silmarillion, which I really enjoy. It's my favorite book of all times.
It's nice to go and check things out in detail.
Yeah, sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph. Hope you're well as well, World of Conan. Actually, okay, I'm just going to plug one stream we did with him, which is the Conan the Barbarian analysis stream, which was really fun. And we got into every scene and every frame of the movie. And World of Conan is utterly brilliant in that live stream. There's also, if you check below on our main home tab, we've got our most recent team up with him, which is Hour of the Dragon, Howard's greatest story. And all throughout that live stream, you'll see just how knowledgeable World of Conan is on Howardian mythology and lore. So do feel free to check that out after this, because he's really brilliant. And we're here, Sisters 2. Lol. Yes, Laurel and the other. Welcome. Honestly, given the smallness of our channel, I'm just glad we have a few people in the chat. Doesn't always happen. Let's see. Where were we? All right. Now here he had gone off. Now there's another thing I want to analyze here. For desire grew hot within him. Here it seems like desire is like the longing for the imperishable flame is compared to a fire here, probably to a destructive fire. Now there's also something else here. I think that there's a slight mythological nod. In traditional Norse mythology, once again, I'm going to harken back to that. Loki is the god of wicked flames that burn men and that fills their hearts with malevolence and greed and selfishness and whatnot. He's the evil trickster, just as Odin is the good trickster. Loki uses his tricks for self-gain and self-amusement. As an archetype, he's comparable to the Joker from the Dark Knight movie. But he's the negative fire, the flame that bursts out of control. Whereas Heimdall is the guardian of Bifrost and the watchman of the Aesir, but he's the god of positive fire, the warmth that you need in the winter, the fire that cooks your food for you. So here it seems like Tolkien's kind of, in a sentence, hearkening back there to this traditional idea, which the idea I think is that creation is good, but don't lose control. Melkor loses control here, as he so often does. Yet he found not the fire, for it is with the Iluvatar. Yeah, he honestly, he didn't know what he was looking for. Yet he thought he knew, but if he knew, he would know it's with a Iluvatar, not off in the void somewhere. Okay, so we had already gone over that. Some of these thoughts he now wove into his music, and straight away discord arose. Yeah, that's where, like you had asked if wickedness had come about from the, like, if it was acceptable for him. And at the start, no, but the minute the music started and he started to go off in his own direction, I think that's when his path was set.
He fell to the prey of the 7 sins.
Yeah.
And more than just one of them.
Yeah. Let me just switch this around so that you guys have something pretty to look at. I'm just going to answer a quick question. Sweet. Have you chapter by chapter Silmarillion review? Well, we're actually still working through it. Okay, at the start, we had thought this would be something we'd do in 6 months, but it's turning out harder than that. Our Silmarillion podcast, which is right below, I think, our uploads on our home tab, is where the playlist is, and it's basically us going over every chapter, piece by piece, and examining it, kind of like this, but more broadly across the entire chapter. Here, we're analyzing Tolkien's Silmarillion sentence by sentence, and this is the difference between the Silmarillion podcast and Over-Analysing Silmarillion. And yeah, we do have a book club podcast all about the Silmarillion, which, like I said, it's the Silmarillion podcast. My favorite of that entire podcast is the Feanor speech episode, which was really fun.
Indeed.
Which is what gave me the idea for this entire live stream, because we overanalyzed the speech of Feanor as he's talking and addressing himself to the Noldor. And that's where, we got to overanalyze that over the course of like 30 minutes, I think. And yeah, it gave me the idea for this, and Dan was on board with this, thankfully. No worries. It's about expression and critical thinking. I have 40 followers, so it's all good. But I like your channel for your live streams about Middle Earth. Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, the first 100 are the hardest to get.
Yes.
But I like your channel for your live streams about Middle Earth. Okay. Well, that's good. In that case, we're going to have to do more.
I agree.
But let's get back to the stream. Oh, and after we, of course, say thank you to Laurel and the other for her flattering words about him. And many that sang nigh him grew despondent, and their thought was disturbed, and their music faltered. But some began to attune their music to his rather than to the thought which they had at first. Okay, here there's something interesting. Now, like a fall from grace of sorts might, you'd think it'd be a conscious act, but there's something Tolkien's doing here. Like, it seems like he's proposing that some don't fall because they want to. They just, I was just following what he was doing. That kind of psychology. So that, I wonder if that's the idea behind some of those who fell.
Mm-hmm. I can't help but think of that. You know how you use the composer analogy? Where everyone
with the conductor.
Melkor's the first violinist, and he changed the song, and the entire orchestra had to change to follow him.
Well, maybe just the violins and the violas are following his lead, while you might have the cellos going, "What are you doing?" And they're going in a different direction.
Concentration between all of them is.
But here there's something philosophically, I think, that Tolkien. Okay, there's something in Kingdom of Heaven. There's a great line by the one king, the King of Jerusalem, who says that when you stand before God, you cannot say, "But I was told thus," and it was inconvenient at the time to behave thus. No, like only you are answerable for your soul. And here it seems like some of these guys and gals are probably going with, well, we were just following his lead. We're not responsible. Which that seems like what Tolkien's doing. He's making a commentary about be careful who you follow around. Think critically. And I think that's the idea here. There's a moral lesson in that sentence about thinking critically. Because look at some of the Ainur just following Melkor blindly, not thinking about the fact that, he's leading them astray. Then the discord of Melkor spread ever wider, and the melodies which had been heard before foundered in a sea of turbulent sound. Here he's bringing in the analogy of water. And here it's a crash, like a crashing wave that's overwhelming everyone in the hall, and everybody's going, what the heck? And, it's like it's a tempest or a storm, and, it's washing people away, and it's
in utter pandemonium.
Yeah, but I think the idea is that for those who end up resisting the theme of Melkor, it's like being at sea and trying to row against a storm. Like you're fighting the tide. And of course, Tolkien, being a lover of the sea, is going to bring in a metaphor for water, because of course he is. I'm joking around there, but he, in all seriousness, did love the sea and the stars. I liked interweaving a lot of that into his work. Interestingly, Howard does something similar with mountains and whatnot, because Howard was a great lover of the hills that I think were just beyond the horizon, over the horizon near his home, so that he interwove hills into a lot of, like into Samaria and into Atlantis, where Cull and Conan are from. So he does something with the earth, but Howard was also fascinated by the sea, so that Cull and Conan often end up at sea, or as pirates or as slaves. And so you have a lot of work being done, hinting and mentioning the sea and, how important it is. But Iluvatar sat and hearkened until it seemed that about his throne there was a raging storm. Yeah, as of dark waters that made war one upon another in an endless raft that would not be assuaged. I wonder, okay, here we're supposed to think that there's eons passing because, like, how long is it? I wonder, like, how long was it before Melkor jumped in? It must have been eons. I think that's the whole idea. You get a sense that there's time unending here. And I really like this, but I'm also going, wow, it's probably supposed to be the idea that it defies human imagining and comprehension. As, dark waters that made war one upon another. Yeah. So it's like we have the countering wave of water, so that, yeah, like you said, it's pure pandemonium. And the comparison to the sea, I don't know if it can be taken literally, but I wonder if it can almost be taken as being at this point that Osei defies Ulmo, so that you have the Lord of the Waves throwing himself forward, and then you have Ulmo responding with his own water, so to speak. That is to say, if they are even connected to water already, because that doesn't happen. I don't think that's supposed to happen until they descend into Arda. So take that with a grain of salt. Lots of salt. Although salt has not yet been created, according to this myth. So, yeah. I'm just going to switch this. I noticed that sentence. Okay. The water sentence. Yeah. Let me just zoom in. Okay, we're making really good time right now. So I'm kind of considering, I've got a bunch of other screenshots, but I've not kind of adjusted them yet. I'm considering actually just that. Because I have to screenshot parts from my copy of the Silmarillion on my Kindle. I've got pretty much about copies of this book, One, of course, for reading in French, another for oath taking, and another one for streams, as is proper according to Lexi, Girl Next Gondor. Then Ilúvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that he smiled. Okay, there I can imagine they'd all be a little like, wait, what? He's smiling. You know, this is a bit of a plot twist here that, he kind of smiles at them. He's like, huh. And he lifted up his left hand, and a new theme began amid the storm. The left hand being the violent hand, I think, in traditional Christian thought. Now, in swordsmanship, left-handed fighters were often perceived as being pretty deadly because most people are right-handed. I believe in boxing, there's a term for those from the South, like Philadelphia, who are left-handed, called southpaw. So, you don't mess with southpaws. Apollo Creed found that out to his chagrin the hard way in the 1 and 2, because he messed around with a southpaw when he really shouldn't have, against the advice of his coach. But here, we've discussed before, I think in our Silmarillion podcast, about the left hand. I don't think we should rehash it too much.
Yeah.
Go check that video out if you want to see more. Just us obsessed about the hands. And a new theme began amid the storm, like and yet unlike to the former theme, and it gathered power and had new beauty. So here it seems like he's trying to lull the storm and, and bring it all together. But the discord of Melkor rose in uproar and contended with it. And again, there was a war of sound more violent than before. Yeah.
We have escalation.
Yeah. And I think the whole idea here is, there's another thing I've once heard. It's that creation itself is an act of nature, but it's also a violent act. Like, for example, when a baby is born, it's often a painful act for the mother, and the child is usually born amidst, to an extent, biological violence. To an extent, it's got to tear itself out, so to speak, with the help of doctors or midwives or whatever. But you look at, in nature, some animals have to protect their cubs from the father to keep them from eating them. Or you have lions who will devour the cubs of another male so that only their own genetics will survive.
Mm-hmm. It's like PPD, postpartum depression.
Yeah.
Where the woman's body is in shock because of the exchange of hormones.
Yeah, I think the idea here is that now the idea of in mythology of creation being a violent thing, if you look at, once again, Norse mythology, there's a war between demons and gods before time itself, in the time before time, and before even the demons and the gods were woven into creation, the realm of fire and the realm of ice warred with each other to an extent. So, and it's through fire and ice meeting with each other that creation wove itself into place. And thus you got the demons, and then they warred with the gods, and then the gods had to war back, and this wove into creation. And in Japanese mythology, you have the conflict between husband and wife, and then a messy divorce that creates that creates man and nature and whatnot. And that also creates Amaterasu and her siblings, Tsukuyomi and Susanoo, the latter of whom becomes a pretty nefarious deity in Shintoism. Ironically, the god of storms, who ends up interweaving a lot of chaos and storms into creation out of spite against his greater sibling, which is Amaterasu, the goddess, because she was given rule over everything. And, he's jealous because she's a girl and she got command over everything. But it was given to her because she was the warrior. He was not as skilled a warrior. So, you have that. And she actually liked creation. He just liked destruction. So there's that little problem as well. Then again, Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that his countenance was stern. So he smiled. Oh, okay, here. But the discord of Melkor rose in uproar and contended with it again, and there was a war some more violent than before, until many of the Ainur were dismayed and sang no longer, and Melkor had the mastery. So essentially, Melkor's managed to silence the naysayers and take control of the floor, with a lot of Ainur discouraged and just like, oh man, we've lost. So here it's interesting because he's managed to gain the mastery, it seems. You almost get the sense that he's exulting. He's like, I am in control here. I have, this is about me now. I've done it. It's all about me now. I'm now king. I'm almost reminded of Scar from Disney. I am the king. I can do whatever I want. You remember that?
Or Ursula.
Oh, yeah. She counted her blessings before, because she had the trident. But then again, Iluvatar and the Ainur perceived his countenance was stern, and he lifted up his right hand, and behold, here the smiles washed off Iluvatar's face. He's not impressed with Melkor winning this fight.
Because initially it's like, oh, this is different.
No, I think he was smiling more as, oh, you think you've done, you've gotten the better of me. At least that's how I like to read it. But yeah, if you want to read it as predetermination,
because for a long time, everyone was harmony.
Yeah, I personally prefer to think that he's smiling, but it's, he is kind of reprimanding a little and going, well, I'm not out of the running just yet. But here he's now going, okay, enough's enough, kiddo. You've kind of angered me now. And now that I think about it, just to go back to your Ursula statement, it's interesting because Ursula wanted the trident because she thought it could create, but then it's shown that she can't create with it. Only Triton can. And so that in the context of the Disney movie of Little Mermaid, he has mastery over creation. And she was just jealous of him and didn't understand that even if she got the trident, she couldn't do anything with it. Like, she can't create with it. Triton can. But it's almost like the power of creation doesn't come from the toy, but from him. And he just channels it through the trident. So that you kind of have thematically the same idea here, that Melkor thinks by seizing control of the music and the themes and the orchestra and the halls that he is now able to create. But no, the creation lies with Eru Iluvatar. So that thematically, Iluvatar's kind of scolding him here. He's grown stern. Let me prep the next text because I had the thought that we might end up having to stop here, but I actually don't want to stop here because we're making pretty good time. I'll just save a copy and stop sharing. I'll go here. Just give me 1 second. And I'll share screen. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to go for about an hour and a half. Because why not? And confusion. And it was unlike the others. It seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling, gentle sounds and delicate melodies. Now here, there's something to be said about subtlety and Iluvatar trying to disarm his foe, not with a great, not with escalation, but de-escalation. It could not be quenched, and it took to itself power and profundity. And it seemed at last there were two musics progressing at one time before the seat of Iluvatar, and they were utterly. The one was but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow, from which its beauty chiefly came. The other had now achieved a unity of its own, but it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated. and it had little harmony, but rather a clamorous unison, as of many trumpets braying upon us a few notes. So here, Melkor is obviously not weaving something of beauty. It's ugly. It's cacophonous. It's just utterly repulsive. It's not pleasant, and that's where he's entirely in defiance here of Iluvatar, and he's not even listening anymore. So that it's interesting because Iluvatar did brief him on his entire song, but it seems like Melkor took that and said, "No, I'm going to make my own." And had he followed the plan, it would have been more beautiful in terms of just music. But Melkor doesn't realize, but he is helping to create something more beautiful by defying Iluvatar. You know, he's interweaving evil, yes, into Middle Earth, but there's something of Tolkien's philosophy, which is to say, life is beautiful in part due to brevity, and this is a Japanese philosophy as well. The sakura blossom is beautiful because it blossoms for but a week in spring, not throughout the year. It is the most beautiful flower because it blooms briefly, yet more brightly than any other flower. That's, I think, the idea here. And the other thing is that now you get a sense that diplomacy is utterly broken down. You know, you have one corner which is doing its own music, and you have the other just trying to go la 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 over the other. So it's utter chaos, and there's no more harmony between the two sides, the two factions.
It's like one side wants to play this classical music while the other is playing heavy metal, both at the same time, and you can't hear anything.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. It's reminiscent of some of the troubles Beethoven sometimes had with his orchestras when he'd come in and try to conduct practice, and the orchestra would just pitch a fit because they didn't like him personally and wouldn't listen to him. When he said, "Listen, I have a plan. Just look at the sheets of music and play the sheets, and I'll direct you." And they'd go, "Well, it's impossible." "Well, you're asking is impossible, and we're not going to do it." So then they'd either fall silent or they just deliberately go off note just to humiliate and embarrass him. And then Beethoven would just get utterly angry or depressed. And then on the day of the presentation, everything would go perfectly. Because, you know, they once in front of a crowd, they didn't want to embarrass themselves. Which, this is kind of the same thing here. And in the midst of this strife, whereat the halls of Iluvatar shook and a tremor ran out into the silences, yet unmoved, Iluvatar arose a third time, and his face was terrible to behold. It seems he's really angry now with the breakdown in diplomacy and whatnot. This is okay. Before he was stern, angry, so I have to correct myself. But now he is angry and wroth. Then he raised up both his hands, and one cord deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, piercing as the light of the eye of Iluvatar, the music ceased. So the piercing of the eye of Iluvatar is something that, however, I would argue is taken directly from Norse mythology, because the piercing eye of Odin is often spoken of, and this is something that is very integral to Norse mythology. So yeah, it's something pretty cool that Tolkien's referenced here. I'm just going to quickly shift image because
The initial
and we've got a few more people joining. Stephanie Frederick, hello. Always a pleasure to have you with us. She's a frequent visitor of the channel. So
initially, well, in the first portion of the challenge between Melkor and Ainulindalë, I couldn't help but think of Isis trying trying to take all of Amun-Re's names
And power.
and power. And the one to try and counter her was Set.
Yeah.
Him eventually getting angry and saying, enough, stop taking advantage.
Yeah, and then he ends up slaying Osiris in response, which causes her to then have her son slay Set. Or at least in some versions. In other versions, Horus and Set fight to a standstill and come to make peace with each other. After Amun-Re has been freed from, by then he's been freed. But then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. And here it seems, he's pointing out that Melkor is the mightiest amongst them. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that have not its source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. Okay, here. Now, this is where, once again, I'm going to harken back to Campbell. To an extent, you could look at it as Melkor can't go against the will of Iluvatar because, it's all predetermined. I don't think that's the idea exactly. But here's the thing. The idea, and Tolkien would have been aware, once again, Campbell was running around all over Europe and the Americas preaching his philosophy and psychology, which one has to bear in mind, Campbell was the heir to Carl Jung. Campbell was preaching that the divine exists within each of us, so that there's a touch of Eru Iluvatar in Aragorn, in Gandalf, and in Melkor, so that you can almost say that he's not exactly a corporeal being, so to speak, able to influence things directly, so much as he's influencing things through the individuals. He's not influencing things through, let's say, the rocks or the animals or whatever. Well, maybe not. Maybe animals, maybe. But he's not influencing it through trees and rocks. He's influencing it through individual action. Because your actions have a touch of the divine in them. And so Melkor has a bit of Eru Iluvatar within him. So that it's almost like he apportioned a part of his being into every Ainur, into every elf, into every man, into every dwarf, into every woman, into everyone, and then into every beast. And this is kind of the Campbellian stance on this sort of thing. And this is a very, very important theme to an extent. Haha, see what I did there?
Yeah.
Within Campbell and even Tolkien's works. And Tolkien was aware of Campbell and of his works on archetypes and the hero's journey, and did, I think, reference it at one point. So that is, oh, sorry, autocorrect. Hi, the Brothers Grin. Hello, Stephanie. You're always welcome here.
Hello.
I often run into her in Indie Geeks live streams, which are just awesome and a work of art all their own. Him and World of Conan both have such a gift for live streaming, which is just incredible. But let's see. Then the Ainur were afraid. Oh, right. I accidentally skipped ahead. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself have not imagined. Yeah. Now that, to an extent, harkens back to the classic fans' thought that, Iluvatar is acting directly, and he has a certain intent and plan and blueprint, and Melkor's inadvertently following it, which, to an extent, you can look at it that. But to an extent, I wonder what the intent of Eru Iluvatar is. Because if we look at this entire thing as like a symphony, what is his intent? Is it to save every individual life or soul or something? Like, because in traditional Christian thought, God wants to save everyone. But in, let's say, in Norse mythology, Odin's desires to protect mankind from wickedness. In even to an extent, Amun-Re and Amaterasu, you have these positive forces of creation. But I wonder if here we're supposed to kind of also look at Ilúvatar and think he's like a painter, where the intent is to make something beautiful. It's not like where the morality is in the enhancement of the beauty to an extent from a certain point of view. So that you kind of have here, Ilúvatar is mostly wanting to make something beautiful and pretty. And Melkor may not realize it, but he's kind of added to the beauty. And this would kind of mean that the intent is different than, let's say, what we might imagine. Now, Ilúvatar does care about every individual in Middle-earth, it seems, at least from later readings of later texts. But I do think that let's at least think about it, looking at him as a kind of artist, artiste, so to speak, who's looking at his painting and going, you were just splashing paint just like a child, just wanting to wreck it, but you might have actually improved it. Because what you don't realize, Melkor, is I'm actually an absurdist artist, not a, like a Beethoven who's got a certain intent. Oh, it's fun to run into you there too. Yeah. Indie Geeks live streams, just so much fun. But anyways, I'm glad I got to participate in one with him on the channel here, so that was also kind of fun. He is a very, very brilliant man and very good conversationalist with a very lovely reading voice when he does do reading of texts.
Can't deny that.
Yeah, him and Grimdark just have the best voices for reading. And World of Conan has a really good one, but I don't have that voice. Then the Ainur were afraid, and they did not yet comprehend the word that was said to them. And Melkor was filled with shame, of which came secret anger. So initially, Melkor's first reaction... Now, Melkor's not fully corrupted here yet. Now, I made the argument he is corrupting himself. It's becoming inevitable because he is father to deed. And his intent is twisting and warping him. But here, the proposal is that shame is, he's initially feeling guilty for his actions and for destroying the music in a way, or at least the symphony. So he's not yet corrupted. He's not yet the monster of the Children of Húrin story. So that you can kind of see the glimpse into what he was before. There's a quote by Mark Twain, which is where he comments on how Christians are very weird in how they're like, oh, I have no compassion or pity for, the devil. And he's like, but shouldn't you? Funny how no one tries to redeem him. But I believe there is and Mark Twain was referencing an old thought that I think the idea is that Jesus does want to redeem the devil to an extent, but he's not going to fall for any of his tricks. And in Norse mythology, there's a continuous attempt to redeem Loki on the part of Odin. Odin keeps trying. And he swears an oath of blood brotherhood with Loki in the intent to, maybe if he binds himself as family to Loki, this will get Loki to start behaving himself. Loki doesn't. Instead, Loki decides to trick Hodder into slaying Balder, betraying Odin's trust and affection. You look at Amaterasu and Susanoo. He takes a rotting carcass alongside Tsukuyomi, and the two, in their jealousy, toss it down into a feast as her and her women are weaving, destroying their tapestry, and just otherwise wrecking their evening. And Amaterasu is very traumatized by this in the myth. So you have here, and Tsukuyomi and Susanoo do this out of jealousy of her. Although Tsukuyomi later is filled with regret and tries to chase after her after she comes out of the cave, and he or she, because gender seems fluid to him, to Tsukiyomi, just chases after Amaterasu, who will have nothing to do with him. Hence, you have the day and night cycles. But here, so the idea is that the corrupted one is oftentimes in myths filled with shame initially, but then the shame starts to lessen as they're filled with anger and hate and vice. But Iluvatar arose in splendor, and he went forth from the fair regions that he had made for the Ainur, and the Ainur followed him. But when they were coming to the void, Iluvatar said to them, "Behold your music." And he showed to them a vision, giving to them where before was only hearing, and they saw a new world made visible before them. And it was globed amid the void, and it was sustained therein, but was not of it. And as they looked and wondered, this began to unfold its history. And it seemed to them that it lived in... Yeah, this is a very powerful sentence here. This is when the act of creation is brought about in its kind of almost fullness, to the shock of the Ainur, who, can't... They didn't realize they were creating. So the earlier paragraph where all about, let's create. Oh, I'm having problems with the next image. Oops, we couldn't save that. Okay, let's try this. Cut it in half. Okay, I'm having problems with images right now. And files and data. Okay, weird computers. There's a reason I'm not a big fan of computers. But now, if we were currently doing this in podcast format, I wouldn't this part, because this is okay. I'm just going to share the image unedited, because I don't really have much choice. There's a paragraph, there's a point in the chapter when it kind of cuts off, and where I'm trying to get to that break, and then that'll be it for the stream. I had gazed for a while and were silent. Iluvatar said to them, "Behold your minstrelsy, and each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I set before you." He told them, "This is your role, this is your role, this is your part," so that they each had a role in the speak. "All those things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Melkor, discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." He's shaming Melkor here. He's saying, you try to undo what I was doing, or at least take it upon, weave it back, in a way, recreate it more to your liking, but you can't, because it's, this is my creation here, and you are, but it, your creation was or destruction was an extension of my creation in a way. "And thou, Melkor, wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind." So Melkor thought his wickedness was hidden from Iluvatar, but Iluvatar here realizes, and perceived and saw through him. And the idea here is that he thought he was hiding it from everyone, but everybody's starting to see, he's kind of fallen from grace. "And will perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." Basically, the idea is that in an orchestra, everybody adds to the overall beauty of the symphony. But also, I think that there's a French concept philosophically that every Frenchman is crucial to Faust, because we add to it, and that you have France propre et France majeure. Like, you have the idea that, for example, Quebec, Cote d'Ivoire, Madagascar, and all these other disparate former colonies are all part of France. And France is not just simply a small country in Europe, but nor is it exactly an empire, but there's an entire culture that's like the Francosphere, and we're all connected to each other, and we're all part of France, like France, the country itself in Europe. We're all disparate, but part of the whole, and we add to the glory and the beauty of France itself. And that France herself has the mission of contributing to the glory of God, because very Catholic country. At least this seems to be this is a traditional French philosophical thought regarding Nouvelle France and France classique. But also, it's been rewoven into the fabric of French society in the past 200 years, due to French philosophers kind of revisiting the notion and whatnot. And that's kind of what's happening here with everybody has a part to play. Like Shakespeare said, we all have our cues and our exits. Melkor thought he was taking control, but really now he's been played for a bit of a fool, because his cacophony is adding to the beauty of Arda, it seems. And so all right. And many other things Ilúvatar spoke to the Ainur at that time. And because of their memory of his words and the knowledge that each has of the music that he himself made, the Ainur know much of what was and is to come, and few things are unseen by them. Yeah, so that's the divine. They can perceive things. When you're in tune with your third eye, you can see things before they happen. That's the idea. There's a spiritual world beyond, the physical, the material. This is the idea of metaphysics, as well as Campbell kind of said that when you're in tune with your higher self, that is to say your spirit, you're utterly at peace and in tune with yourself. You'll be able to perceive things more than what they are. And that's kind of the idea here, except the Valar are able to take that to a upteenth level beyond the understanding of man. Yet some things that, okay, I already read that. For to none but himself has Ilúvatar revealed all that he has in store. Yeah. And in every age there come forth things that are new and have no foretelling, for they do not precede them from the past. And so it was that as this vision of the world was played before them, the Ainur saw that it contained things which they had not thought. So, yeah, the idea is that who can predict the future? The future is fluid, not fixed, and yet it's deeply rooted in the past. Something without a past has no future, and a future with no past. Yeah, the future it cannot be without the past, and the past cannot be without the future. Same, and the present is created from the future and the past, interweaving together, I think. And they saw with amazement the coming of the children of Ilúvatar. This is their first interaction with mortals, and their first vision of them, and the habitation that was prepared for them. And they perceived that they themselves, in the labor of their music, had been busy with the preparation of this dwelling. And yet, okay, so here they realized that their act of creation of the world is something that it's brought into being something they never even could have imagined. And it's something that kind of took on a life of its own. And it's only now that they realized that Ilúvatar had lent them the creative fire, and that they were able to create something that was beyond their understanding, and at least at first beyond their understanding. You know what? I think that's actually a good place to end it. And as we've been going on for about an hour and a half, and we've just gotten, the arrival of the children of Iluvatar, the elves, the firstborn, the secondborn, the thirdborn. I don't think I have anything more to add. And as I'm fairly hungry, and it's almost supper time where I am, I think it's appropriate to end it here. And next time I live stream Over-Analyzing the Silmarillion, maybe I'll continue with the idea of finishing this first chapter, which I'm not sure if that'll be next week or the week after or the week after that or something, but I'm hopeful that maybe we can continue this in this month. It means redoing a bit of older content to an extent in live stream format, but I don't mind that. My hope is to maybe have the next Silmarillion podcast out this month as well. So that series will continue because it needs to. I really want that series to remain quite a bit ahead of this live stream, because this live stream is just going over old stuff from a different perspective. The book club podcast is it's going into the chapters and going over, like I said, the chapter by chapter. This is going it into the individual text and sentence by sentence. So it's overanalyzed. Good night and see you tomorrow. Yeah, see you tomorrow in Deep Geeks live stream, Stephanie. I'll definitely see about showing up. Starting a new job tomorrow, but hopefully, mostly it's going to be a morning shift. So hopefully that'll allow me to show up at 5 and where I am and attend Indie Geeks live stream. Nicely done. Thank you, Mark. I think next time we're going to pick up from the Children of Iluvatar forward, and we're going to maybe do this with a Q&A at the end regarding the music of the Ainur, because I want to kind of have the latter half of the music, and then, we're going to go from there. So if you enjoyed this stream, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as though you were Melkor wrecking the music of the Ainur. And hope you all take care and tune in for our next stream, whatever that may be or when that may be. So do take care, everyone. But we'll definitely be doing another stream or something before Christmas. So
Take care.